Thank you for joining me on the Cancer Has No Borders podcast. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome back Dr. Mark Lanasa. He's a Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at BeOne Medicines. Thanks so much for being here today, Mark. I'm glad to have you back.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Zach.
I want to start off with just kind of talking about BeOne's clinical pipeline. Can you talk about how BeOne's clinical pipeline is different in a crowded solid tumor space?
Absolutely. So we have a growing and now relatively large portfolio of investigational medicines in the solid tumor space. And I'll highlight two potentially paradoxical qualities, which is to say that we have both focus with diversification. So we're focused insofar as we have disease areas of interest, lung cancer, GI cancer, breast cancer, but we have diversification insofar as once we make the decision that we're going to go into those disease areas, we look at lots of different targets and we consider different type of targeting modalities so that we can bring the greatest benefit to patients. But again, there's also an element of focus insofar as there are certain drivers of cancer biology that we think are particularly important, and therefore we'll use those different modalities to develop multiple investigational medicines against a single target. For example, EGFR in lung cancer or KRAS in GI cancers.
So, Mark, you are a doctor, and why did you pick the career or the career path to come and work as a chief medical officer for a pharmaceutical company instead of being a doctor that would treat individual patients?
Yeah, I would start by saying that frontline clinicians, the physicians who see patients day in and day out, have my great respect and admiration. It's critically important that we have physicians who provide care to patients with cancer or really any disease. For me, I worked as an oncologist, and I had time where I was in the clinic seeing outpatients, and then I had time when I was seeing inpatients in the hospital. And my experience in the inpatient setting was that we were giving patients chemotherapy. And again, I practiced a couple of decades ago now. And what I witnessed was that the chemotherapy would cause the side effects that people associate with chemotherapy, whether it was nausea or low blood counts, risk of infection, hair loss, and other things. While when I was in the outpatient clinic, I became involved in clinical studies, and I started to treat patients with these new targeted therapies. And I saw the amazing responses the patients were having, even patients who I didn't have a good chemotherapy option for.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is really what I want to work on. So I decided to commit full time to working on targeted therapies. And the best way to do that was to move over to the sponsor side to become a member of a company working on investigational medicines. And essentially, that's what put me on the path to the role that I'm in today.
Did you ever think that you would work for a company that has this large of a pipeline portfolio and is looking to do this much good for the world?
Certainly, it was my aspiration, and the reason why I was so excited to join BeOne was the scientific innovation and the aspiration to have a large pipeline. But the other piece that's really critically important is our commitment to global patient access. That when I transitioned from practice into industry, one of the reasons that I thought of, an additional reason that was important to me, was the opportunity to help patients around the world. So our mission related to global patient access and helping patients wherever they are, that cancer has no borders and neither do we, that absolutely resonates with one of my key reasons for why I wanted to leave practice and move to investigational drug development.
And what would you tell a patient that is, I've spoken with lots of patients over the years and caregivers and people in industry. How important is clinical trials for patients?
Clinical trials are how we advance the state of care.
Yeah.
It has been one of the most satisfying things about my professional career, even so many things that have happened that I have not been personally involved in any way. But again, when I was in clinical practice now roughly 20 years ago, mostly we were giving chemotherapy drugs and some steroids, and that was about it. So to see the advent of biologics, to see the advent of targeted therapies, then to see the impact of immunotherapy really the way the patients are treated today has been utterly transformed over the past 2 decades. And I think that we can have that continued step change in how patients are treated with more targeted therapies and more tailored, personalized cancer therapy.
So we have a big discussion going on across the world about AI. Tell me how AI is used in R&D for solid tumors.
So AI has so many applications across almost all facets of our life.
And
It's
constantly
amazing.
growing, right?
Yeah, it's amazing how fast it's moving. It is really important in the drug development space because when we talk about AI, really what we're talking about is digital automation. And there are a number of things in the drug development process that are, shall we say, somewhat repetitive or somewhat formulaic insofar as how we write our clinical protocols, how we set up our databases, how we review data, how we develop different documents, how we report our data. There are, shall we say, routine components of that that actually are quite amenable to automation. And those things actually interplay with each other. And therefore, if we use automation to help us write our protocol, then that can pull through to helping us to build our clinical database, which then can pull through to actually performing the analyses on the data. Of course, it still requires us to look at it, make sure it's making sense, that we're testing the core clinical hypothesis that relates back to how we were hoping to help the patient. But it does have the opportunity to really accelerate the drug development process. And really, that's what we're all about, moving with urgency to help patients.
When you started a couple of decades ago, did you ever dream that we would be here with AI or have a tool like this to speed things up or just,
Not honestly, no,
yeah,
not in this way. And again, as time goes by, internet searches and
yeah,
wireless and Bluetooth, those things were just coming
yeah,
online when I was in clinical practice. So I believe it was Bill Gates who said that people overestimate how much things will change in 1 year, and they underestimate how much things will change in 10 years.
yeah,
So at a period of 20 years, things have certainly changed
yeah.
more than I anticipated.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the role of combination therapy in solid tumor oncology?
So, combinations, we believe, are centrally important. Cancer is a difficult disease because it's biologically diversified. Most cancers have multiple abnormalities that they do not follow their normal cellular processes. And therefore, there might be a therapy that has some benefit, but if you block one pathway, well, the cancer cell will find a way around it and use an alternate pathway. So, therefore, the way to really address cancer is through complementary blockade of these
Mhm.
different pathways, and i.e. combinations. You can model this mathematically, and it's thought that most cancers probably need 2, 3, maybe even 4 drug combinations. There's some challenges about how we design studies in ways that can unambiguously attribute benefits of individual agents in those combinations, but I think it is broadly accepted that combinations are the cornerstone. Coming back to our pipeline at BeOne, we think that having this large and diversified pipeline that focuses on both different mechanisms and different targets uniquely positions us for in-portfolio combinations,
Mhm.
which again, we think will be critical for maximizing patient benefit and ultimately our goal of achieving cure even for patients in advanced stages of disease.
What makes you confident that the pipeline, given that most of the assets are still in early stage development?
So, a couple of things. One is that we, within the development organization, I think have shown that we can develop strong investigational medicines. We have an approved PD-1 targeting
Mhm.
antibody. We have approved BTK inhibitor. We've announced positive top-line data for our novel BCL2 inhibitor. But just as important and probably more important is the quality of the preclinical research that's happening in our research and discovery organization. So we have a very large group of over 1,100 preclinical scientists
Wow.
that are totally dedicated to innovation and developing first-in-class and best-in-class medicines for patients with cancer. They are working on a large number of preclinical programs typically 75 to 85 at any time. And it's our aspiration to bring the best 8 to 10 of those molecules into the clinic each year. So we think by having this high level of scientific rigor, where we understand the biology, intelligently design drugs using different modalities to go after that biology, and then being really stringent about what we actually advance into the clinic, that really positions us for success throughout the drug development life cycle.
Wow, great. What clinical development is a complex process. We have made great progress. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, again, we have two globally approved medicines now, our BTK inhibitor and our PD-1 inhibitor. That is a relatively lengthy and complex process where you first develop data that helps you understand safety and how to dose, and then ultimately that you develop these large randomized clinical trials that show that there's benefit across different patient segments in a target patient population. For our BTK inhibitor, it is now approved in 75 countries around the
Wow.
world. Our PD-1 inhibitor is approved in, I believe, 47 different countries in at least one indication. So I think that this shows that we're designing studies that will enable approvals around the world. And it also reflects our commitment to making sure that we can bring these impactful medicines to patients wherever they are.
How important do you think it is that we have most of our clinical trials being done within the organization and not kind of outsourcing that? And that's, I mean, that the speeding
Yeah.
up everything. And so,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that as well?
We think that having an internal delivery model has a number of different advantages. So, for sure, the fact that you raise related to speed is one of those key
Yeah.
advantages. That because we're making the decisions and because we're going to the sites directly, that enables us to move quickly and with urgency. Because there's not an intermediary, it also helps us to control cost, which we think is important because it, again, enables global access of our medicines in the longer term. And what we've also found is it has a benefit insofar as it enables us to develop more authentic relationships with the sites. It's one of the aspects of my role that I am really grateful for and I enjoy is I get to travel around the world and meet directly with the investigators who are enrolling patients on our clinical studies to explain why we believe in our medicines, why we're excited about the science, and why they should consider enrolling one of their patients on our clinical studies.
And it's important also to have these around the world just because you have different kind of patient populations and the diversity to it as well, right?
Exactly. So there is the possibility that, for example, in different populations around the world, that drugs might be metabolized in slightly different ways, and some patients might have a slightly higher exposure or different genetic polymorphisms that might impact the efficacy or safety of a drug. And therefore, it's really important that we are able to deliver global studies that also have a diverse patient population so we can confidently go to regulatory authorities and ultimately patients with confidence that this new medicine will bring them the same level of benefit that was achieved in the clinical study.
So the drug discovery team is your kind of your key partner in bringing new therapies to patients. How would you describe our drug discovery unique strengths?
Again, we have a large and very dedicated team that has deep understanding of the biology of cancer, deep understanding of immunology, deep understanding of hematology targets as well. They're organized around different modalities and different therapeutic areas, and they have a very rigorous process that moves our investigational molecules through a process of series of selection. We have expertise in medicinal chemistry, in chemical engineering for manufacturing, in protein biologics that enables us to essentially have expertise or to be good at a number of these different modalities. And then again, it's really important that we're highly selective, that we're looking for very specific characteristics for molecules that we ultimately bring into the clinic.
Mhm.
And another factor or mantra that I've heard from our preclinical research team is they have this relentless commitment to make it better, make it better,
Yeah.
make it better. So, for example, I've mentioned our BTK inhibitor, which we believe is an outstanding BTK inhibitor, but we wanted to continue to innovate because we know BTK is an important target, and therefore we now have a BTK degrader, which also looks like it's going to be able to bring benefit to patients with B-cell malignancies. So that's just one example. I mentioned before our commitment to EGFR biology, to RAS biology. So there's this constant cycle of innovation that's happening.
What excites you most about our pipeline today?
Um, so when I'm asked that question, frequently people are wondering what molecule am I most excited about, and I'll come back to that. But really what I'm most excited about is the opportunity that we have for success across, or if not success, impact across such a large number of solid tumors. We brought 13 new investigational medicines into the clinic in 2024. This is more than any other company of any size around the world. 10 of those were internally discovered. And now that we're here later in 2025, we're seeing clinical responses in patients with lung cancer, with breast cancer, with liver cancer, with gastric cancer, with ovarian cancer. So by having this diversity of molecules, diversity of targets, we're now have confidence and belief that we're going to be able to bring meaningful clinical benefit across a range of different patient populations. That's incredibly exciting and so motivating, not just for myself, but for the entire development organization. Insofar as what specific molecules I'm excited about, not so long ago we had an R&D Day event, and at that event I highlighted 4 molecules, including our selective CDK4 inhibitor that we're developing in breast cancer, our MTA cooperative PRMT5 that we're developing in lung and pancreatic and GBM, as well as other tumor types, our B7H4 targeting ADC, which we're developing in breast and gynecologic tumors, and finally our FGFR2b targeting ADC, which we're developing in gastric cancer. Again, speaking to the diversity of patient populations, it might be able to derive ultimately benefit from these investigational medicines as we continue to generate clinical evidence.
When you get the opportunity to meet patients that we've helped at this company, what's the feeling that you get?
I feel a lot of pride. I feel humbled by the patient's willingness to participate in a clinical trial. There's really an important commitment that's made that in the investigational setting, we can't offer them any assurance insofar as either efficacy or safety. So the patient is, shall we say, taking a calculated risk. They're willing to take a risk that other patients might benefit. When I was a physician investigator, I often enrolled patients, and so often I would hear patients say, I don't know if this will help me, but if it might help somebody else, that is a reason why I would want to participate in a clinical trial. So I reflect on that when I meet patients. I'm very grateful for the sacrifice and their willingness to help us to advance the state of cancer care. And of course, it's a source of joy for me when patients ultimately do derive benefit from our
In
studies.
clinical trials, they get super hyper care also, right? I mean, that's one thing I think a lot of people don't understand is just how much care and extra attention that they get.
So it's part of the clinical study that there are frequent visits, there are lab tests. So in a way, this can also be considered a bit of a burden for a patient. So again, it's part of the sacrifice that patients make by participating in a clinical trial, that it's more complex than approved therapies. However, I think that there is also real clinical benefit for patients who participate in clinical trials insofar as that extra level of oversight of every symptom that comes along for really detailed characterization that may provide some additional level of protection for the patient as they go through their treatment journey.
And do you ever take a moment to kind of, the end of the year, you're like you think back and you think all the great things that you've done and all the things that you're doing to kind of help and all the future patients you're going to help. Do you ever stop and think about all the great work that you're doing?
Thank you for the question. I guess what I would say is I would start by saying I'm just part of a team. that there are thousands of people on our team who are committed to bettering outcomes for patients with cancer. Insofar as myself, again, one of the things that's really a joy for me in my role that I'm grateful for is the opportunity to talk about our company like I'm doing right now, to talk about our mission, to talk about what excites me about the pipeline. And as I prepare for presentations to various groups, it gives me the opportunity to really take a step back, look at the data, reflect on how much the teams have accomplished. I think in the day-to-day, you're sending emails that can get lost. But then when you have these, shall we say, milestone events, the enormity of what's been accomplished becomes clear.
I think you should, though, sometimes step back and think about it is thousands of people doing this, but you're leading those teams, and that says a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you really should give yourself credit because I think it's amazing.
Thank you for that. But again, we're all one team with the same commitment.
You've been a great guest, Mark. Thank you so much for being on. I hope to have you back as a third time because you're a great guest. So thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Zach. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Be sure to follow us and subscribe to our podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, or iHeart. You can also subscribe to the video version of the podcast on YouTube. Thanks so much.